I collected some oak leaves and some acorns on a recent walk to do a little watercolor painting. I quickly drew the oak leaves and the acorns, and then started painting them. I really want to focus on glazing with the watercolors. So I laid out the acorns and the leaves and kind of looked at them and figured out where to draw them in what I thought would be an interesting composition. Painted the leaves green. I just re-wet those green leaves, and now I'm adding more color over that green. So this is the glazing effect. You have a base color down, and then you can add some more color. I got it wet so that the color that I'm adding on top of it wouldn't have a lot of lines. It just kind of flows and moves over the color that's underneath. And I'm helping push it around also with the paintbrush. So a lot of dark green and yellow. And there's my head. I do get that in the way a bit this video. I apologize. I'm not a videographer. And I don't know if you can see, but I just added a little bit of blue to kind of punch up that green a bit. Really like adding some other colors, especially the blue with the green. It's a nice cool color, and I think it goes really well with the yellow and the light hooker green, sap green color. So now adding some color into the acorns. Again, start with a base color and then just keep adding colors on top of it as it starts to dry. You don't want them completely dry. A little damp allows the next color added on to bleed in and to lay nicely on top of the first color. So that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of getting some color in, and then while it's still damp, going back in and adding some different colors. I'm using a couple of browns and then a red. I think the red adds a nice pop of color into these. So those are the colors that I'm using for this. I am using my watercolor paintbrush. It's the brush that holds the water right in it. I have decided that I like this brush, although I do still dip it in water and use it as a traditional watercolor brush. So again, it doesn't really matter what you're using. This started out as an experiment. I really didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to draw the oak leaves and the acorns. I knew I wanted to use my micron pen to outline it. But outside of that, I wasn't really sure. I was honestly thinking that this should be an autumn type painting, and as I got going on it, it got less and less autumn and more about the colors of the paint that I was using, the watercolors, and how to glaze them. So I'm adding water to the tops of these acorns and then dabbing away what the water loosens up, the paint that the water loosens up, so that there's a nice highlight on the tops of those acorns. It's a really neat technique. You just add the water, and then it loosens up the paint that's already there, and you can use a cloth to pick that up. Now I am adding water to the areas where the background areas, so that I can begin to paint that. This part of the video, I am sorry, I got my head in it a lot. You get to see a lot of my hair. And I do apologize. It is the only section of the video that I did this repeatedly, but hopefully you can see around it and it's quick enough it doesn't drive you too crazy. I will continue to work on my videography skills. But if you get the paper wet with the water and then add in the watercolor paint, the pigment, it can flow and move, and it doesn't dry before you have a chance to add other colors in. And see, there's a lovely shot of my head. You can add other colors in with it. So I started with a gray blue and then added the red that I had used in the acorns and in the stems of the leaves. So now I'm adding a little bit of the blue that I had put in the leaves. I do like to use the same color in multiple locations in a painting if at all possible. So you can get my head out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just continuing to add color and to darken down the background a little bit. Now, as you know, watercolor does dry light, so it makes it nice for glazing because you can go back in on top of it. You also can get it wet and continue to move it around a bit and add more pigment where you need it. So at this point in time, I had kind of finished with the glazing, or thought I had, and was trying to, mess around with some other things to do with it. I like the image, but it doesn't feel done yet. So I got my pencil because although you can see the pencil, it's not loud and in your face. So it's a good way to figure out what you want to do next. So I did like the pencil shading and decided to go ahead and get some dark blue, gray blue paint and put shadows underneath the leaves and the acorns. So that's what I'm doing here. And now I'm adding more pencil because I'm still not 100% sure if the paint's enough, if it needs a little more. So I'm just kind of finding my way through this painting. So at this point in time, I have cut a piece of sponge off the corner of a kitchen sponge and gotten it wet. I've dipped it directly into my paint, and I am dabbing that on the damp background to add a little bit of texture to that background because I liked the colors, but they seemed a little flat, a little lifeless. So the sponge, depending on how wet it is and how much pigment you get, will add a nice little texture. And some of it I'm putting in a lot of pigment and a lot of texture, and other places a little. I also added some of this to the leaves so that the leaves had a little bit of texture on them as well. One thing to note here, with the pencil on wet paper, it will tear your paper. So if you do continue to use pencil and your paper is wet, be very gentle with it. It will tear. So will the micron pen that I'm using now, but not quite as bad. Pretty much the micron pen won't draw on anything that is too wet. So it doesn't rip it. It just, you need to wait for it to dry a little bit. I decided that I did like the pencil shading, and so I went in and reinforced that with a very thin micron pen. This micron pen is a 500. It's a very thin one. So I'm just finishing up the painting here. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that you experiment with watercolor and glazing. Have fun with this one, guys. Post your finished paintings and hashtag #MayYouCreate so we can all see your beautiful work. Bye, guys.